Section 1. The Storm Before the Impossible. June 1st, 1944, Portsmouth Harbor, England. Cold mist hangs over the water as Lieutenant Commander Earl Patterson stands on the edge of dock number 3, his gloved hands trembling, not from fear, but from exhaustion. Behind him, cranes screech, chains rattle, and sparks fly from welding torches as thousands of American engineers race against time. Somewhere in the gray fog, massive shadows move, shapes so large he can barely comprehend them. A gust of wind blasts across the port, carrying the smell of salt, oil, and wet steel. Patterson narrows his eyes. Through the haze, an enormous concrete caisson, a Phoenix unit, 6,000 tons of reinforced stone, rises out of the water like a gray leviathan. Men cheer as tugboats strain against its weight, dragging it toward the channel. 7 days. That was the deadline. 7 days to build what the generals were calling a miracle. A floating harbor big enough to supply an entire army. A harbor that did not exist yet. A harbor that, if it failed, might doom Operation Overlord. Patterson hears footsteps behind him. Turning, he sees Major Harlan Briscoe of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, rain beating against the brim of his helmet. "How many are ready?" Patterson asks. Briscoe exhales, staring out at the organized chaos before them. 24 Phoenix caissons, 18 bombardons, 50 pierheads, and one very nervous engineer battalion. Patterson forces a grin. 7 days, he repeats. This is madness. Briscoe shakes his head. No, he says. This is D-Day. Lightning flashes far out at sea, illuminating the titanic construction effort. Thousands of workers, American Seabees, British Royal Engineers, Canadian welders, civilian contractors, move like ants across the docks. Sparks erupt from steel skeletons. Cement mixers roar. Trucks rumble past carrying beams the size of trees. The Mulberry Harbor. A man-made port the size of a small city. Not built on land, but towed across the English Channel. A concept so insane that many commanders dismissed it. A concept so critical that Eisenhower approved it anyway. Patterson watches another Phoenix unit emerge from dry dock, water gushing from its sides as it slowly sinks into the tide. He imagines it drifting across the channel under fire, waves pounding its sides and then settling on the sands of Normandy like a fallen fortress. Behind him, Briscoe mutters, "The Germans have their Atlantic Wall. We have this." "This," Patterson replies softly, "is how we beat them." A klaxon blares. Workers begin guiding yet another monstrous section into the water. Dock lights flicker across the steel frameworks of the floating roadways. Whale bridges, long steel spans that will rest on the tide like the backbone of some mechanical beast. Each sway in the wind. Each must survive storms. Each must hold up the weight of tanks, fuel trucks, artillery, everything a conquering army needs. "You ever wonder," Briscoe says, "how we explain this to the world when the war's over?" Patterson smirks. "We won't have to. They won't believe it anyway." For a moment, the harbor falls quiet, just the sound of waves and distant thunder. Patterson lets the silence hang, because behind that silence lies something terrifying. The knowledge that tens of thousands of American, British, and Canadian soldiers are right now preparing to storm the beaches of Normandy. And without this floating harbor, they cannot win. The portable docks, floating piers, breakwaters, tugboats, caissons, pontoons, every piece must fit perfectly. Every section must survive the crossing. Every anchor must hold. A single storm could tear the whole thing apart. As another crack of lightning splits the sky, Patterson whispers the truth no one dares say aloud. If Mulberry fails, D-Day fails. And somewhere across the channel, the German guns wait. Section 2. The Blueprint of a Miracle. June 2nd, 1944. Admiralty Headquarters, London. Rain batters the tall windows of the war room as Rear Admiral John Hughes Hallett leans over a massive table spread with blueprints, charts, and hand-drawn sketches. Cigarette smoke curls through the air as British and American engineers crowd around, their eyes bloodshot from nights without sleep. A single phrase is scrawled across the top of the largest blueprint. The harbor must follow the army. Across the room, the door slams open. A drenched courier hands Hughes Hallett a folder stamped Top Secret Mulberry. Inside are status reports from American yards, British dry docks, and Canadian steelworks. Hughes Hallett doesn't need to read them. He already knows the truth. Half of the harbor doesn't exist yet. The other half is barely holding together. But the invasion date is fixed. The harbor must be ready. He taps the blueprint with his pencil. The Phoenix caissons go here. They form the breakwater. They must create calm water even in storm conditions. Colonel Briscoe, still in his soaked raincoat, studies the diagram. And if they don't hold? Hughes Hallett glances up slowly. Then our men land in chaos. Supplies rot on open beaches. The Germans counterattack, and the greatest invasion in history becomes a disaster. Around the table, engineers exchange grim looks. They've all heard the intelligence reports. Rommel has reinforced the beaches, mined the roads, flooded the fields. The German 7th Army waits behind steel bunkers and concrete teeth. But none of that matters if the Allies can move tanks, trucks, fuel, and ammunition inland. Fast. A harbor is not a luxury. It is oxygen. On the wall, a large map shows the future coastline of D-Day with two massive stamps. Mulberry A, Omaha Beach. Mulberry B, Gold Beach. Two vast artificial ports. Two floating logistical lifelines. Hughes Hallett's voice cuts through the tension. The Germans believe we cannot land in France because we don't have a port, so we will bring one with us. A burst of laughter comes from the corner, half disbelief, half admiration. A young American engineer, Lieutenant Samuel Ortega, shakes his head. My father built barns in New Mexico. Never thought I'd be building a city that floats. Ortega steps closer to the blueprint. These whale bridges. He traces the long, flexible steel spans designed to rise and fall with the tide. You're asking them to carry Sherman tanks, fuel convoys, artillery tractors, thousands of tons every day. And they float. Sir, with all respect, that's insane. Hughes Hallett shoots him a tired smile. Yes, Lieutenant, it is insane. But so is fighting a world war. Lightning flashes outside. The lights flicker. A British officer steps forward with a new report. The caisson factory at Tilbury is flooded. Production delayed by 12 hours. 12 hours. A lifetime in this race against time. Hughes Hallett doesn't flinch. Work through the night. Pump it dry. Tell them the invasion depends on every brick. The officer nods and rushes out. At another table, American planners examine weather forecasts. The channel is notoriously violent. One bad storm and everything could fail before it's even deployed. Patterson enters the room, dripping wet from the docks. Sir, the next Phoenix unit is in the water, but the towboats are overstressed. We're running out of cable. Use ship anchor chains if you must, Hughes Hallett snaps. Just get them across. The engineers disperse, their boots splashing in puddles along the floor. Hughes Hallett moves to the window, watching the storm-ravaged city below. He whispers, almost to himself, once those boys are on the beaches, we cannot fail them. He presses his hand against the cold glass. Below, buses roar through the streets, transporting workers to night shifts. Britain, battered and weary, is still fighting with everything it has. Behind him, Briscoe studies the blueprint in silence. "It looks impossible," he says. Hughes Hallett turns, his tired eyes burning with conviction. "Impossible nonsense built this plan," he says. "Now, impossible engineering will win this war." Outside, thunder cracks across London, echoing the urgency, the chaos, and the sheer madness of building a floating harbor in 7 days. Section 3. The Race Across the Channel. June 7th, 1944. Somewhere in the English Channel. The sea is a churning gray monster, heaving under the weight of hundreds of Allied vessels. Liberty ships, tugboats, tankers, landing craft. An armada unlike anything in human history crowds the horizon. And in the middle of it all, towering above the waves like ancient giants, the Mulberries begin their slow, impossible journey. Aboard tug HMS Growler, Chief Boatswain Ernie McAllister grips a slick handrail as freezing spray slams across the deck. Behind him, a massive concrete block, a Phoenix caisson, taller than a 4-story building, weighs down the sea. It is one of 146. Each one must reach France. McAllister turns to his crew, shouting over the storm. "Keep her steady! If this bastard breaks loose, we'll be picking pieces of tugboat from Scotland to Dover." The men fight the ropes, the strain killers, thick cables groaning under tens of thousands of tons. One snap could carve a man in half. But they hold. Above them, a seagull screams into the wind, barely able to stay aloft. McAllister spits over the side. "Bet that bird thinks we're insane." Miles ahead, another convoy pushes forward, this one carrying the Whale Causeways, long, flexible steel roadways designed to hover above the water like floating highways. On board the American tug USS Kiowa, Lieutenant James Cartwright watches the swaying span behind him, rising and falling with the violent sea. "How the hell is that thing going to support tanks?" he mutters. The British engineer beside him, Major Leonard Woodhouse, smiles. "Same way we'll win this war, Lieutenant, by refusing to accept that anything is impossible." Lightning splits the sky. The steel bridge glints like a silver serpent twisting in the storm. Dozens of miles to the southeast, the shores of France roar with thunder. Omaha Beach is still a graveyard. Wrecked landing craft lie shattered along the surf. Tanks sit half-buried in sand. Bodies are being carried inland by stretcher-bearers. A war correspondent scribbles in his notebook. "A port must come, or this entire invasion will choke on its own success." He looks to the horizon where silhouettes of colossal caissons slowly materialize from the fog like ghost ships. The Mulberries are arriving. June 8th, early morning, just off Gold Beach. The first Phoenix caisson reaches its assigned position. British divers descend into the icy water, navigating blindly by touch. "Flood the chambers!" the lead diver shouts through his radio. Valves open, water rushes in. The caisson begins to sink, settling onto the sea floor. A British officer marks the location on his map. "One down," he says quietly. 145 to go. But there is no time to rest. Incoming fire echoes from the cliffs. German artillery is still active. A shell lands 200 meters away, close enough to drench the men with a column of sea spray. Cartwright drops to the deck. "They're trying to sink the harbor before it's even built." Woodhouse pulls him back to his feet. "Then we must build it faster than they can destroy it." All day long, tugboats drag caissons into place through rough surf. Engineers curse in 6 languages. Divers freeze. Ships collide. Cables snap. A tug sinks. But progress continues. Then, as twilight falls, something miraculous happens. From the shore, from the smoke, from the chaos, a line begins to form. Gray shapes stretching across the water, one after another, becoming a shield, a wall, a breakwater. For the first time since D-Day began, the waves near Gold Beach soften. A British sergeant stands ankle-deep in the surf, staring in disbelief. "My God, we're building a city," he whispers. Behind him, an officer replies, "No, we are building victory." Section 4. The harbor that shouldn't have worked. June 10th, 1944. Gold Beach, Normandy. Dawn creeps over the horizon, bleeding pale light onto a coastline still shaking from the first week of battle. The air smells of burnt metal, cordite, seawater, and something new. Hope. Staff Sergeant Will Harper of the 146th Engineer Combat Battalion kneels in wet sand, binoculars pressed to his eyes. Before him, an impossible silhouette stretches across the morning mist. A floating harbor. A man-made miracle. A steel and concrete fortress rising out of the sea. He lowers his binoculars slowly. "Sir, it's actually holding." Standing beside him, British Brigadier Guy Monsell, the structural genius behind the Mulberry concept, nods without taking his eyes off the colossal breakwater. "It has to hold," he murmurs. "The fate of Europe is riding on 20 square feet of steel and a bit of British stubbornness." Offshore, dozens of ships now wait in neat lines. Freighters, LSTs, Liberty ships, forming a maritime highway leading straight into the floating port. American Seabee Commander Lieutenant Harold Dixon steps aboard a freshly anchored block ship, an old hulking freighter deliberately sunk to form the outer wall of the harbor. The deck lists at a miserable angle, creaking under its own weight. Dixon wipes sweat from his brow. "Never thought sinking ships would save lives." A Royal Navy officer smirks. "War is full of surprises, Lieutenant." Below them, divers secure chains and anchor points. Above them, cranes swing steel girders the size of locomotives into position. All around them, men shout orders over the thunder of waves and distant artillery. And in the middle of it all, rising like the spine of some mechanical leviathan, the first whale pier snaps into place. Floating. Swaying, holding, a walkway over the sea. Hours later, the harbor roars to life. A massive LST, its bow doors yawning open like the jaw of a steel monster, crawls toward the entrance. Inside sit dozens of Sherman tanks, engines rumbling, crews tense with anticipation. On the command ship, Canadian officer Captain Henri Duval watches through high-powered optics. "They're coming in," he calls. "Clear the pier! Move! Move!" The LST slowly aligns with the floating roadway. Its hull bumps the side of the pier, once, twice, and then locks in tight. A whistle blasts. "Drive!" Sand sprays, tracks grind. The first Sherman rolls down the whale bridge, clattering across steel plates suspended inches above the ocean. One tank becomes two. Two become 10. 10 become hundreds. A river of armor flows onto French soil. On the beach, an infantry private drops to his knees, exhausted but ecstatic. "Look at it. They built a port faster than the Germans can destroy one." By nightfall, Mulberry A and Mulberry B are unloading 9,000 tons of equipment per day. Rations, ammunition, medical trucks, bulldozers, anti-aircraft batteries, fuel drums stacked like a metallic forest. The numbers are staggering, more than any port in France could ever hope to handle under fire. And yet, there is trouble brewing. Out at sea, the wind begins to howl. Waves rise, hammering the caissons with swelling fury. Chief Boatswain McAllister looks west and curses under his breath. "That's no storm," he mutters. "That's a monster coming for us." Engineers brace, commanders pray. Men cling to steel railings as thunder splits the sky. The worst storm to hit the channel in 40 years is on its way. But for now, just for this moment, the Mulberry stands triumphant. The port that shouldn't exist does, and it is feeding an army. Section 5. The storm that tried to break the invasion. Continue seamlessly from where this left off. June 18th, 1944, English Channel. The sky turns black long before sunset. Wind howls like a living creature, hurling sheets of icy rain across the makeshift harbor. Waves rise, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, rolling like dark mountains toward the fragile floating port. American CB Chief Boatswain McAllister braces himself against a buckling handrail, oilskin jacket whipping violently in the gale. Every wave slams into the caissons with the force of artillery. "Hold together, you bastard," he growls into the wind. A British engineer beside him screams over the roaring surf, "This wasn't in the tests! We never built for this!" McAllister spits salt water from his mouth. "No one builds for Armageddon." Across the Mulberry Harbor, chaos erupts. Whale piers, the flexible steel roadways that made the miracle possible, twist under the strain of the churning sea. Bolts shear off like snapped bone. Sections of the floating bridge rear up like the spine of a wounded beast. In the command shack, Colonel Ulysses Grant Schley slams both hands onto a shaking table as reports pour in. "Pier C is breaking apart. Blockship 14 is slipping anchor. The caissons are cracking, sir. They can't take much more." Schley stares at the chart of the harbor, jaw clenched, rain dripping from his cap onto the map like falling blood. "Get every man off Pier C, now! I'm not losing people to a storm!" In the distance, the groaning pier gives one last tortured bend and snaps. A 100-ton segment flips into the air, then vanishes beneath a boiling wall of water. Just offshore, a Liberty ship desperately fights for control. The large freighter bucks wildly, its bow swinging dangerously toward the already damaged breakwater. Captain Lewis Monroe clutches the wheel, shouting at his crew, "If we hit that caisson, we'll tear the whole damn harbor open." With engines screaming, the ship inches away from the concrete barrier by mere feet, just as another wave slams sideways, throwing men to the deck. Below deck, loaders cling to chains, yelling prayers in 3 languages. It is no longer a battle against Germany. It is a battle against nature itself. On the beach, medics drag injured engineers to safety. Tents rip from their stakes, tumbling like ghosts across the sand. Amphibious trucks overturn in the surf as soldiers tie ropes from vehicle to vehicle just to move without being washed away. Yet even in disaster, the invasion presses forward. A drenched, shivering lieutenant watches a bulldog tractor shove debris aside and mutters, "If this thing survives, we deserve to win the war." Behind him, the massive British-built breakwater, Mulberry B, shudders but holds. Barely. On the American side, Mulberry A continues to crumble. McAllister, soaked and exhausted, watches a final whale pier tear free and vanish into the raging Black Sea. "That's it," he whispers. "She's finished." By June 22nd, the sun rises to reveal a graveyard of twisted steel and shattered concrete. The American Mulberry is gone, destroyed beyond repair. But the British Mulberry, though battered, still stands proudly offshore. A monument to ingenuity, a fortress against the sea. Commanders gather on the beach around General Omar Bradley, who examines the wreckage with a heavy heart. "It's a loss," Bradley admits, "but not a defeat. Because during the storm, even as the harbor broke apart, the Allies had already landed enough troops, tanks, ammunition, and supplies to break out of Normandy. The Mulberry had done its job, and now Europe's liberation could begin. Section 6. The Harbor that Refused to Die. June 23, 1944, off the coast of Arromanches, France. A pale dawn breaks through the thinning clouds, casting soft silver light across the battered remains of the Allied harbor. Smoke drifts over the water like ghostly fingers, rising from twisted metal and shattered caissons. The storm has ended, but the reckoning has just begun. British Royal Engineer Major Reginald Lawson, mud-stained and sleepless, stands atop a surviving Phoenix caisson. The gigantic concrete block trembles under his boots, still groaning with the pulse of post-storm waves. He doesn't smile, but he is alive. And so is his harbor. Below him, dozens of engineers wade through waist-high water, their uniforms soaked and faces streaked with grime. They move with grim determination, pushing floating debris aside, securing ropes, shouting over the crashing surf. One corporal yells up to Lawson, "Sir, Whale Pier 9 is listing, but she's still intact." Lawson cups his hands around his mouth. "Then we save her. Every inch we hold buys another day of supplies." Farther inland, Allied commanders gather inside a makeshift operations tent, its canvas still flapping from last night's winds. General Bernard Montgomery leans over a map, a cigarette burning between his fingers. General Omar Bradley listens quietly as naval officers argue about the viability of continuing operations. A logistics officer slams his pencil on the table. "Gentlemen, Mulberry A is gone. We need to shift to beach landings." A Royal Navy captain shakes his head. "You don't understand. Without the British Mulberry, you'll never land enough fuel to break out of Normandy." Montgomery speaks at last, calm and cold. Mulberry B holds. And while it holds, so does the invasion. Bradley exhales and nods. He knows the truth. The harbor that survived would now become the lifeline for two armies. Outside, a team of Seabees guides a massive Liberty ship toward the preserved British harbor. The ship's hull is scarred from the storm, but its cargo, ammunition, canned food, medicine, radios, remains dry. The pilot aboard the vessel shouts, "Easy! Easy! Keep her steady!" With a thunderous groan, the ship locks into the floating pier. Deckhands throw lines, tying the vessel to the newly reinforced moorings. A cheer erupts from the engineers on the pier. Within minutes, cranes swing into motion. Supplies flow like blood returning to a wounded body. A British captain watches the scene and murmurs, "She's bruised, but she's alive." By afternoon, the surviving Mulberry springs back to life. The air rings with the roar of bulldozers, the metallic clatter of tools, the whistle of cranes, the rhythmic stomp of soldiers unloading cargo. Sunlight glints off the water, revealing the immense scale of the steel and concrete skeleton stretching out over the channel. Despite the storm's violence, the harbor still stands, a mechanical leviathan refusing to sink. On shore, French civilians gather along a cliff, astonished as endless streams of Allied vehicles roll down the repaired piers. Trucks, jeeps, tanks, ambulances, all born of factories thousands of miles away. A little French boy tugs on his mother's dress. "Maman, c'est comme une ville flottante." His mother smiles through tears. "Yes, a floating city, and it will free us." As the sun dips low, Major Lawson stands again on the caisson, watching the revived harbor at full stride. Cargo nets swing, vehicles rumble across the whale bridges, men move with purpose. The lifeline of liberation flows once more. A British sergeant approaches him, wiping sweat from his brow. "What now, sir?" Lawson looks out across the horizon where ships continue to appear, dots that grow larger, one after another, as if pulled by destiny. "Now," he says, "now we build faster than the war can destroy." The Mulberry is no longer just an engineering marvel. It is the artery through which victory will flow. Section 7. The storm that nearly destroyed everything. June 19th, 1944. Off the coast of Normandy, the sea is beginning to turn. At first, it's only a whisper, a low wind curling across the channel, the kind sailors shrug off as another moody French morning. But by noon, the sky has grown darker, its gray belly sagging over the Mulberry Harbor like a warning. Waves slap harder against the steel pontoons. Chains rattle. The floating roadways groan under the rising swell. On the deck of a U.S. Navy tugboat, bosun's mate First Class Jack Mallory narrows his eyes at the horizon. "Storm's coming," he mutters. A British officer beside him replies, "Not just a storm, a bloody Channel tantrum." By nightfall, the tantrum becomes an assault. Winds roar at over 60 miles per hour, tearing across the artificial harbor with the fury of artillery. The floating breakwaters, the massive bombardant pontoons, begin to heave like beasts in pain. Their steel cables writhe and snap under the strain. One cable rips loose and lashes through the air, slicing a wooden crew shack clean in half. At Mulberry A, the American harbor, engineers scramble desperately across the quivering, floating roadways. Rain blinds them. Waves explode over their boots, but they cling to their mission. Keep the harbor alive. Keep the supplies flowing. Keep the invasion moving. Because without Mulberry, Normandy dies. But the storm is merciless. One by one, the floating causeways twist, buckle, and shatter. A pier snaps loose and slams into a rhino ferry, splitting it open like a can. A Sherman tank sits helpless on a collapsing floating roadway as the sea tears the structure out from beneath its tracks. The tank tumbles sideways, swallowed by the surf. Mallory grips the rail of his tugboat as another massive wave rises over him. "We'll lose everything!" he shouts, and for a terrible moment, it seems true. In 48 hours, the American Mulberry is wrecked beyond recovery. Its breakwaters scattered, its piers destroyed, its carefully built system ripped apart by the worst channel storm in 40 years. But Mulberry B, the British harbor at Arromanches, survives. Barely. Through a mix of better positioning, frantic repairs, and sheer luck, the British harbor holds long enough to keep the lifeline open. When the storm finally breaks and the sea recedes into exhausted silence, the scale of the destruction is beyond what any engineer had feared. General Eisenhower tours the wreckage of Mulberry A 2 days later. Twisted steel lies tangled in the sand. Concrete caissons, each weighing more than a destroyer, sit cracked and half-buried. Eisenhower stands there for a long time, raincoat flapping in the wind. Finally, he says quietly, "We'll use the British harbor. And then, we'll improvise." In war, survival belongs to the adaptable. And now, the greatest military supply chain in human history must adapt or collapse. The storm had destroyed Mulberry A, but it had not destroyed the Allied invasion. It had only forced the Americans to prove something the Germans never expected. They could build faster than the storm could destroy.